Thank you, Yumna, for your very kind presentation. It's a pleasure to be here to do this first panel. So this first panel, I was asked to be extremely brief in my role of chair and the introduction of the panel itself and the person. So I'm going to abide to the instructions. And so this first panel is titled Artistic Research on Death and Migration. So we have a range of speakers here. So the first speakers will be Anja Simonsen and sorry, I didn't spell your name. Both from the University of Copenhagen and both from the team of SOLI, the Existing Research Program. And then we will have a presentation by Maria Karalaki on the visual haunting and from the University of Birmingham, and a last presentation by Melissa Morali from the University of Bologna. It was at the end of the month page, and I forgot. Of course, how can I forget Freya Power, coming from the other side of the Atlantic, who is based at the Parsons and the New School. So, yeah. And without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to Anja and
so I could just shortly introduce ourselves. Gule Byred is a political scientist and a postdoc at the Solid ERC Starting Grant project, where we are researching on on the social life of deceased migrants, so the tragedies and the sort of effects of lost human lives. And then we have Felician, who's also part of it, who most of you know, who's also a postdoc on the project. So our presentation today is based on very preliminary data because we just started the project. Here we go. So our presentation today focuses on public identification and representation initiatives after tragedies of shipwrecks in the context of migration in Italy, more specifically in Lampedusa and Milan. It zooms in on what Carina Horsti has termed the afterlife of deceased migrants, referring to how the disaster of the shipwreck, where many people have lost their lives, and I'm quoting, continues to reappear in the public sphere through two domains, representation and memorialization. And today I'm going to invite you to Lampedusa. In the summer of 2022, where I was conducting fieldwork. Upon arrival, I was struck by a fatigue and a tiredness from locals in Lampedusa of people like myself coming from afar and wanting to represent them, the island, and the people who died in the attempt of reaching it. This made me curious to understand the complexities and ambiguities of practices and perceptions of representation in the context of migration, and how memorialization and representation is as much about the ones who represent as it is about the ones being represented. Through my network as a migration scholar working in the field for over a decade, I was put into contact with a woman who had been part of starting up the Solidarity Forum of Lampedusa, Forum Lampedusa Solidare, approximately 10 years ago. Before the creation of this forum, people from civil society and the church would spontaneously go to the dock upon arrivals of people who had fled, bringing clothes and bringing food. But then they decided to join as a group that had no admission fees and which was open to everyone. And they started to organize practices of representation. The one I'll present today is the trip that I went with a woman from this forum to the graves of the unknown that you see here on the pictures, that the Solidarity Network has worked to humanize. They go there every 2 or 3 weeks to make sure that people are not forgotten. Christina, as I've called her here, and I bike to the graveyard. What catches my eyes is the beautiful colors. It's powerful, impactful, difficult to forget. Together with an artist, the Solidarity Forum has created the beautiful artistic impression that you see on the pictures here. In the left corner of the main picture to the right here is an exhibition of these pictures. The barbed wire is a symbol of what the EU's and international policies are part of, and how they have made the sea into a border, according to Christina. On this graveyard, one of the Graves stand out for me. I cannot seem to forget the memory of having seen this particular grave, where we see a picture of a young boy, less than 2 years old, who died on 11th of November 2020. His name was Yusuf Ali Khani. He fell out of the arms of his 17-year-old mother, who traveled with him from Tunisia. He was lifted out of the water and they tried CPR, but he unfortunately lost his life. They fled due to poverty. He and his mother had left for Europe while leaving the boy's father back in Tunisia to gather more money to come as well. The forum arranged a small ceremony for baby Yusuf together with Yusuf's mother. At the ceremony, a local woman put a scarf around the mother, and this action inspired the Solidarity Forum to knit small squares where everyone would put some kind of migration history into it. In October 2021, they all sewed these small knitted squares together, and then they sat in front of the church in Lampedusa. Not because we're religious, most of us are atheists, but it's in the middle of the city, so for everyone to see, Christina explained. The Solidarity Forum do this kind of work to keep all of us remembering the tragedy. Not only the big tragedies, such as the one from 3rd of October 2013, but also the smaller tragedies. Christina explains, if you do not show dignity to the dead, you also don't show dignity to the people who are alive, as they share very similar destinies. They are both giving a number instead of a name. They are treated as if they are not capable of making decisions, but in fact, they are very capable of making very difficult decisions. They are treated as if they are not able to act. We always compare this to when the Nazis sent the Jews into the camps. They were also provided with numbers, Christina says. We look at the graveyard while she's explaining. She tells me that the Solidarity Forum is planting plants here, but already 3 plants have been stolen. I say, really? Yes, some people don't like what we are doing here, the kind of work we are doing, Christina says. The dislike of the Solidarity Forum's work by some people on the island spoke to a larger discussion within the forum of who they represented. Whose voices did they speak on behalf of when turning the graveyards into a place of memorialization? According to Christina, the forum did not speak as one collective voice. She explained, we believe that our singularity is to be preserved. We don't have a spokesperson. Sometimes when we have to agree, we have to argue a lot to be able to agree on something. In fact, she explained, there was an ongoing debate within the forum of how they positioned themselves in local society. One group argued that their representations were part of the local society as Lampedusians. She was not part of that group. Christina instead argued that as many of the forum's members were not born on the island, but instead came from many different parts of Italy, they would never be part of local society and thus didn't represent the views of the island. The forum's act of representation, I would argue, was also very much shaped by the confrontation with the tragedies of shipwrecks, but also the changing political narratives and policies. As Christina explained, we have to keep alive the memory of the ones who arrived dead. You keep the memory of the one who died, their stories, who they were. They were people, not objects, not numbers. They had dreams and hopes. They were good and bad. They were people. The ones who survived. We have to dignify them, not to dehumanize like the system wants. If you respect the hopes and feelings of the person, it would be an enrichment of society. In the wall behind the graves, a white tall wall that you see on the picture, an artist from Switzerland has painted maritime animals like fishes and octopuses as well. These animals welcome the people who arrived here, the ones who fled. EU is what made them die, not the sea, Christina said. Hence, the painted animals from the sea were a way to change the political narrative of the sea as a natural death, as the work of Jason de Leon has also told us. We leave this area, or this part of the graveyard, to go to the old part of the graveyard. This part of the graveyard is less kept with flowers and plants. Some of the Italians who are buried here are also unknown. They are most likely poor, Christina explains. We walk towards a specific spot. The first grave she shows me is the one of a woman named Wilela that you see on the picture here to the left. She tells me that it is the association together with displays of ceramics which made the picture. She's wearing a cross, earrings, and is standing with a feather in front of the wild blue sea with big waves of barbed wire and fire. Her eyes are closed. Christina tells me the story of Wilela. Wilela was 18 years old and from Eritrea. She died in 2010. Wilela has a painful story, Christina explains. In Libya, she was taken together with other refugees in a warehouse which was locked up from the outside. They were provided some rice, water, a little to survive, and a small stove. One day, the gas exploded. A lot of people got injured. She was one of them. There was no medical attention or care for her, and a few days later, she was forced to embark on one of those rubber boats in pain. She explains that Wilela unfortunately died on that boat. We know her name because people who traveled with her knew her. So her story was told to a woman at a finance office in Italy upon the arrival of her dead body. Thus the story was passed on. When someone dies like this, a judge should decide if autopsy is needed or if the person died of natural causes. So from the custom upon arrival to the judge in charge, Wilela's name was lost, and thus her name was not noted down anywhere. A while after, the woman from the finance office in Italy was told that a man from Sweden had come to search for the information and the body of his sister. The woman remembered the destiny of Wilela and delivered the information to what turned out to be Wilela's brother, who had gotten now the confirmation that his sister had died and where she was buried. Christina explains how she and the others from the association conducted a small ceremony to send to Wilela's family to let them know that he had died and where she was buried. The trip to the graveyard that day shows us what Diane Taylor has termed cultural memory and how it's practiced through two forms of technologies, the repertoire and the archive. Archival memory exists as apparently enduring materials such as texts, photographs, documents, and objects. In this case, the paintings, the ceramics, the knitted squares. The repertoire, on the other hand, is the embodied memory and knowledge that's enacted through forms such as reality that we see through Christina's narratives to me and everyone else on the island, as well as the commemoration ceremonies. This turns representation into a threefold practice. One, about living in Lampedusa for many years and yet not feeling as one of them. Two, about representing people who had fled against a public and political narrative that often defines refugees as helpless yet dangerous as statistics and numbers. And three, a representation towards family members of memorialization and dignity, humanity.
Can you hear me? You can. I'll just try to speak like this. The second public commemoration of deceased migrants is the mobile exhibition, A Name Not a Number, that took place in Milan. In Milan in May earlier this year. The exhibition builds on the Augusta shipwreck of April 18, 2015, in which more than 1,000 people who were on board the fishing boat died, while only 28 survived. It was thus the largest known migrant shipwreck that occurred in the Mediterranean and is so to this day. But before I go into detail about the exhibition itself, I would like to take a few steps back and talk about the people behind the initiative and the work they are doing. And how this exhibition is a result of many years of tireless forensic work. The initiative behind A Name Not a Number stems from the Laboratory of Forensic Anthropology and Odontology, known as Labanov at the University of Milan. The team is led by Professor of Forensic Medicine, Cristina Cataneo, and has for more than 2 decades worked on identifying human remains in complex and sensitive contexts. But since 2014, Labanov has applied its forensic skills to a different kind of investigation, namely that of deceased migrants in the Mediterranean. This shift came in response to the growing number of shipwrecks in the preceding years, as well as to specific initiatives by the Italian government that aim at recovering the dead, documenting the victims, and assist the families in identifying their missing relatives. Following the shipwreck of 2015, the Italian government launched a national effort to recover the vessel and its victims, which was both a rare and a politically significant decision at that time. A special task force was set up to coordinate the recovery, documentation, and identification process, with Lebanon taking a leading role in this. The wreck and its victims were recovered and examined in order to collect every possible piece of data that might help identify the dead, and the modern data was gathered from over 300 families who were searching for their loved ones, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. And 33 people have been identified so far. The activities carried out so far have shown that the families of deceased people are claiming their dead, and that these victims can be identified, just like victims from any air crash or mass disaster. As Christina Cattaneo has often emphasized, this is a fundamental right of the living who are searching for their missing loved ones. For over a decade, the Lebanon team has worked to develop a database containing DNA profiles and post-mortem data from the deceased migrants recovered in the Mediterranean. Through this work, they have also exposed the limits of traditional forensics, which so far has meant relying on matching viable DNAs, data reports, information from family members who are often difficult to locate. And with people on the move, it's rare that family members are actively searching for their relatives, because it has been possible to even know where their person might be, or whether the person is alive or dead. So Christina Cattaneo has therefore argued for the need to rethink and reinvent forensics to adapt it to the realities of contemporary migration through the Mediterranean, but also beyond. For her, forensic identification is not only a scientific task, but a moral and humanitarian one. It's about giving back a name and an identity to those who have been deprived of them, and in doing so acknowledging that every loss at sea deserves recognition, memory, and justice. So the mobile exhibition can thus be seen as the public face of this long and difficult forensic work. The exhibition was held over 3 days in Milan earlier this year, between May 8 and 10, and it built on a combination of materials collected during the identification process and a series of installations that recreated key moments from forensic work. There was a model of the Melilli base, which is seen on the right here, a small reconstruction of the makeshift morgue where they attempted identifying the deceased, and a miniature version of the fishing boat that was recovered in 2016. Some of the victims' personal belongings were also shown, as seen on the left. And finally, there were also an exhibition included. There were also a film included in the exhibition within a tent where a letter that was found in one of these deceased migrants were read aloud. So the mobile exhibition was created to honor the victims, but also to show that behind every single person recovered from the sea, there's a person, a story, and someone waiting for answers. And even the name also directs it that way, that it challenges just the narrative of focusing on statistics and numbers, and from numbers to names. As one of the main architects behind the exhibition, Cattaneo explains that the University of Milan for years have been working to restore identity and dignity to those who have lost them, because identification, she says, is both a scientific and profoundly human act. Identity is the most precious thing that we have, and restoring a name means restoring rights, and no one should be deprived of them. And finally, the fact that the exhibition is made in a way that it's able to travel through international borders, from country to country, is also quite significant, because it will reach the public beyond Italy. And we are also in the Solid team, together with Anya and Felicia, currently working on bringing this exhibition to Denmark, to 2 different sites. Yes. So both of these exhibitions and ways of commemoration humanize deceased migrants, but does so in their own unique way. As Anya showed, the exhibition in Lampedusa approaches commemoration through artistic expression with decorated gravestones and creative installations. It's an exhibition that relies on art to make absence visible and to create a space of mourning and remembrance. The mobile exhibition from the forensic team meanwhile, comes from a very different starting point. They have spent years on identifying the victims of the Augusta shipwreck, and the exhibition is their way of both humanizing and educating the public. It takes the tools of forensic science, such as personal artifacts, and moves it into the public sphere. Where the Lampedusa exhibition can be perceived as a more creative way of commemoration, the Lebanon project draws on decade-long of scientific documentation. What unites these two approaches is the way that they both invite the public to reflect on the two massacres, the dangers of migratory routes, and at the same time refuse anonymity. They insist that those who die at Europe's borders are not statistics, but people with identities, families, and stories. And in doing so, they both intervene in broader narratives. Although they rely on different means and expressions, they use deceased migrants' bodies in different ways to educate the public and speak against public narratives of irregular migration and border death. They both foreground border death to develop subtle critiques of militarized borders, the apathy of the European political establishment, and the unfair treatment of people on the move who died at the borders of Europe. They can thus be seen as transformative political projects which, apart from humanizing, identifying, and commemorating deceased migrants, also aims at challenging the public as well as the political narrative around migrant deaths. Thank you.
Thank you, Gül. Indeed, the border death, it's a domain where the different forms of knowledge are extremely porous between the knowledge activists, the research, the creativity of the artist as well. It's all completely entangled. So we are going to, I think, to carry on with this issue with Mariana, coming from Birmingham, and your PhD student in political science. So I suppose you are going to present your research.
So today I'm going to present part of my thesis, but also part of my work as a journalist, because before I entered academia, I was working as a journalist, and I was reporting on the refugee crisis in Greece. I'm focusing on Lesbos specifically, so I'm going to take you through a walk in Moria and the cemetery of Lesbos from 2016 until 2022. There's no theoretical contribution here, no methodological contribution. I tend not to speak about them publicly. There will be mentions, but I do not go too much. It's an attempt for me to see if this story works so that I can add it in my thesis, basically. So my research generally looks at borders, violence, and death, and as part of this, I look at the liminality of life and death and the liminal spaces of mortality. This is not the main focus, but it is part of that. As part of it, I examine life and death at the border, as well as the aftermath of moments of death, if that makes sense. So this is Moria. On the left, there is the design of Moria when it was alive. And next to it is Moria after it burned down. Moria was one of the hotspots in Greece, one of the 5 hotspots in Greece. It is still the most known one. Its story is quite interesting because it used to be a military camp. I tried to trace it back, I couldn't, because the people I know in the military did not give me any information. However, I think that my granddad, for example, was stationed there during the invasion of Cyprus, according to his descriptions, which are not very detailed. In 2013, it became a pre-removal site, and in 2015, it became a hotspot. The camp is built on a hill, and it's an absolutely stunning area if you forget what happened there. It's surrounded by olive groves. The main hotspot had certain designated areas. It had, for example, a section for unaccompanied minors, a section for recently arrived people. That was a prison, essentially. A section for single women, families, and children, and a section for single men. Due to the number of people who lived there, the story of Moria took place outside of it, because the capacity at some point was 3,500. I may be mistaken on the numbers, by the way. At some point, it reached 13,000 in 2020 when it burned down. So people lived outside of Moria. So life was taking place outside of Moria. And these photos, for example, they are from 2019, I think, and they're showing life. And I remember discussions I had with the photographer I was working with at that time. And every time I went to Moria, it was to document a disaster. And usually it tended to burn every September, and that was quite significant. And I remember a specific discussion that we had. The conditions are horrible. The interviews that we are getting talk about horrible situations, things that we couldn't even write publicly. The photos that we had told a different story, especially when the weather was nice. So it was a horrible discussion to have as journalists, but this is how things are. And as I said, Moria was full of life, and I see it as a rite of passage for thousands of people. I started photographing it not because I was selling my photographs. At that time, I wasn't working. I didn't even call myself a photographer, but I was keeping an archive of what I was seeing at the borders. And that archive started in January 2015 at the Greek-Macedonian border. People lived in a state of exception. They existed in a state of ambiguity and disorientation, but at the same time, they had formed functioning communities. Normal hierarchies may have been suspended, but solidarity emerged among participants in that liminal space. And at that time, I didn't realize that. I didn't even think of those communities that they were being formed. And Agamben may talk about bare life, Vajer talks about bare camps, and in a way, this is what it was, but when I start looking at the photos without looking at the interviews, the story is quite different. Life is everywhere. And refugees experienced profound psychological trauma. The limbo, overcrowding, and constant fear took a toll. Their lives were reduced to day-by-day survival, without opportunity or dignity. And in effect, they were alive in a body, but socially dead. And one aspect of my research that became clear after Moria burned down is that although people were reduced to bare life due to political decisions, they insisted on life as a result. So in a way, they resisted their reduction in nothingness. The quotes I have here from stories that I've written, they're not part of my research. And one interesting aspect of Moria was that it operated as a city, it was actually much larger than my hometown in Greece. There were 2 bars operated by refugees. There was a bakery, an Afghan bakery specifically, best bread I've eaten in my life, by the way. And there were different shops around the camp. And this is something that I also saw at the Greek-Macedonian border in 2015. When I went in 2020, these photos are from 2020. Right after the fire. They're about 2-3 days after the fire that completely destroyed Moria. I went there with a Norwegian TV channel as a producer, and we saw the destruction of the area, but we also saw life right outside. It's not right outside Moria, it's near Moria. Thousands were displaced, because as I mentioned, there were 13 people living in Moria by that time. And they had lost almost everything. COVID was spreading because it was in September 2020, and there were no plans by the Greek government. The Greek government at that time did not have any intention of rebuilding Moria. The military was setting up another camp, an emergency camp in a shooting range. And this camp was supposed to be temporary, but it still exists to this day. Another camp, prison, will open soon, but I was told in 2022 that it was going to open in February 2023, but it's still not operational. So I spent a few days photographing the aftermath of the fire, and I wasn't just working. I didn't intend on doing any work on my own there, because I was working for someone else, but I was photographing just to continue the story that I had started doing in 2015. And one thing was clear, is that Moria was physically gone, but its power was hovering over Lesbos. And I used Derrida lately, and the specter of Moria is that which is neither dead nor alive. And this makes sense to me. And these photos are from 2022 during my PhD fieldwork. For my fieldwork, I didn't really attempt on going to Moria, but it started making a lot of sense. It just drew me there. And if you look at the photos, they show the life that still existed. These are 2022. There was nothing, it was still alive. The power of the people in Moria was still present in the camp. I was walking and photographing the camp, and I was all alone at that time. And I remembered voices, noises, smells, and conversations. And I remembered people that by that time I had actually forgotten. And the camp still exerts the influence and power that it had during that. This is the cemetery. The camp still has power. Even during that time, Moria's story was still ever present, and people did not exist there, but I was walking to the areas that I used to walk in the past, and I could remember every single conversation that I had with them. Bear in mind, my memory is horrible. I generally don't remember anything. After Moria, I went to the cemetery of Lesbos. That was not supposed to be part of my PhD at all, or my research. I just wanted to go there to see how that cemetery is, and see if it was similar to the cemetery at the Greek-Turkish border. And as soon as I entered, I was absolutely shocked, and I entered by jumping the fence because it was locked. The cemetery has changed now. It has been taken over by an NGO and has been rebuilt. But during that time, it looked like that. You could not see the graves at all. You had to walk a little bit to find them. As I walked in, the first graves were from Shia Muslims. There were 2 or 3, if I remember correctly. And what shocked me was that the architecture of the graves was that it was very similar to Greek graves, Greek Orthodox graves, which I had not seen in other Muslim graves in the past. Another section had graves from Syrian refugees who died in 2015. So for example, this one are 2 infants. They have not been recognized, a girl 3 months old and another girl 3 months old. And it shows the day that they died, on the 22nd of November 2015, and the date of their burial. The date of the burial and the date that they died. For me, that was the most shocking aspect of Moria, that as soon as I realized what I was seeing there, my whole thesis changed.
Lesbos or Moria? Lesbos.
This is in a village next to Moria.
Is the cemetery Lesbos or Moria? This one? This one, Lesbos?
Lesbos, yeah. I tend to use Moria when I talk about Lesbos, but it is in a village called Kato Tritos. What was also interesting is that the actual cemetery is built opposite the Greek Orthodox cemetery, which I have never seen before in Greece. And another section had the graves of people from Somalia who had died in a very recent shipwreck. You can also see that they're quite different. And to me, that indicated class distinction in death. So generally, and I'm going to finish now, I use photography both as a form of documentation, but also as a form of communication with the spaces that I examine. And when I look at the photos, away from the interviews that I've taken, a new story emerges. So hopefully I will be able to tell this story, and we'll see how things go. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mariana. So our next speaker is Melissa Morali, and so you're based at the University of Bologna, but your research is just in Marseille, so it's very close. And so you're going to talk about the Frontières Invisibles, researching the invisible borders and artivism in the city of Marseille.
as a sociologist of culture at the University of Bologna, but as Thomas said, my research, the research that I'm presenting today is about Marseille, and it was conducted between 2022 and 2025. So now I'm still in the analytical phase. Just to outline the main topics about the interconnections between migration and the arts. I know that the majority of you already know these main topics, but I just wanted to cite them with some references as well. The first one is about cultural production and access to culture by migrant people. The second one is about the arts and the imaginaries connected to the arts when talking about migration. I don't have the time to go in depth into all these topics, but as I said, it's just an outline. The third one is about artivism and migration. Then there is the topic of cultural identities that is also connected to all the new forms of colonialism, arts and borders, as it was already presented in the last presentations. And then there is the methodological issues, so how creative methods intervene in migration studies. So I would like to focus in this presentation about the concept of artivism, because it was central in my research. There is no common definition about artivism. There is still no definition, actually, because there are different bodies of knowledge, and artivism is still a fluid concept, let's say. But what we can agree about is that it combines arts and activism. This is easy, okay, because the concept itself talks by himself, and so it relates to those practices, cultural practices, that try to answer some emergencies of our times, social, ecological, political emergencies of our time. So this is also a bit autoreferential, let's say. So I would like to go a little bit in depth into the connection between artivism and migration studies. This is an encyclopedia that we did actually with two Spanish colleagues, Laura Oso and Natalia Ribas Mateos. And in this encyclopedia, actually, since artivism was still a fluid concept, we wanted to ask activists and artists and scholars to write short entries about the connection between artivism and migration. And so we had 200 entries about this topic, and I said we tried to build an encyclopedia because it's still a work in progress, in the sense that there are so many interconnections between artivism and migration that it's impossible to finish it. Now it's going on, it's still going on. When we present the book, for example, there are other people that we invite, and we discover that, we forgot about this entry, for example. In this encyclopedia, there are a lot of entries that are about death and migration. You cited, you mentioned before Carina Orsti. So she wrote, for example, an entry about civil investigation in the Mediterranean. There is Federica Mazzara concept about reframing migration. There is the United List of Refugees' Death. There is Arkady Zaide's project, Necropolis, and Maya Ramsey exhibition, Sink Without a Trace. So there are a lot of entries, of course, because it's a big issue, that of the necropolitics and border violence and recognition of dead bodies, that a big number of entries is about this. So let's go back to the concept of artivism itself. It can relate to different forms of artistic expression: graffiti, festivals, performing arts, visual arts. There is really not a specific category, but one aspect that characterizes more or less all artivist projects is that they engage directly the audience. So it's not only about artistic production, but it's also about how we can engage the audience in order to answer together to these challenges. And so I don't open this parenthesis because it would be like 15 minutes only about this, but it can be a form of political and cultural participation. We know that the forms of participation in politics are changing right now. It's not only about voting or being part of a political party, but they can also be, I participate through arts and culture or through my consumption choices, for example. So in this case, artivism becomes a form of participation, not only for artists, but also for the audience. No? Of course, there is also a connection with Rancière, Spectator, no, and so on. But we don't open again these issues. So activism can create opportunities to write colonial history, geopolitical relations, stereotypes, forms of racism, and to support forms of socio-environmental justice. There are also, I forgot to mention them before, but a whole body of literature about activism and climate-induced migration, for example, that is quite actual topic. It's not actual, the problem, but I mean, it's now theorized, especially in these last decades. And it tries to do so through aesthetic practices that have also political and ethical dimension. So what I would like to present today is this research that I conducted at the beginning alone, and then together with Iranian artist Ali Zareganatnawi. So I arrived in Marseille in 2022, and honestly, I didn't know very well what to research, I have to be honest, because I knew that I wanted to study the connection between arts and migration. I'm a sociologist of culture, then I was particularly interested in the cultural imaginaries about migration and the forms of cultural production by artists. But Marseille is a very complex city, and there are a lot of actors actually dealing with migration and arts, as you will see also on Saturday, if you're going to the tour. So I arrived there and I said, I don't want to arrive with specific research questions. I prefer to do an exploratory research. I want to talk with people. I want to understand what are the main challenges, no, that I can study, what are the main pathways that I can follow. So I did that for 9 months. And it's like, I'm writing an article right now where I'm speaking about, I try to conceive it more such as a more than participant observation. Because I arrived in Marseille, I lived near the station. I don't know if you know a little bit Marseille, but it's quite a complex neighborhood. At the beginning I was saying, why am I here, honestly? And then I started to get in love with the neighborhood, and it's like if the fieldwork came to me automatically. I have to be honest, I didn't make a lot of effort to do the research, because you went to a bar and people started to talk with you, also listening to my Italian accent when I speak French, and maybe, yes, also English. And they started to say, where are you from? I don't know, my grandparents were Italian, and they were talking to me, but actually I come from Algeria. So it was really, I don't know, like the fieldwork was coming to me. It was particularly rich and intense. So then there was the phase of ethnography, where I outlined more specific questions, and a phase where we adopted arts-based methods. So I'm talking about this phase, this third phase, because we don't have the time to talk about the other one. In this phase, we try to conceive the concept of right to the discourse, in the sense that we wanted to focus on what were the practices of participation and reappropriation by artists who experience migration. So, of course, it is inspired by Lefebvre's concept of a right to the city. And we conceived the right to this discourse as the combination between the right to speak. So, do actually migrant people have the right to speak about their experiences, or is only academics and journalists or artists, other artists that speak about them? So it's different, no? And do they have some arenas, let's say, some possibilities to be heard? Because it's not enough that they speak, but actually who is listening to them, no? Are their voices heard and visible? So I went to Ali with this in mind, and I told him about the research, the first insights about the ethnographic research. And at the beginning, actually, I went to him and I said, I would really love to do an animation about my research results. And he was looking to me and I was like, okay, first of all, it's not very interesting. I don't know who is looking to it. And he was right, because, I mean, we present this maybe to some conferences, but then maybe doesn't have, what is, how can I say, the power in terms of co-construction about this, because it was more dissemination, no, it was not research. And then he said, okay, let's talk about your research, and then we can think something together, like what we can research, investigate further, and how we can present it as well. I went to him because I didn't want to impose the topic, because one of the issues when talking about arts and migration and doing research with artists who experience migration is that everybody is asking to them to talk about migration. So it's the risk of essentialization. And a lot of people told to me, we don't want to speak about migration, we want to be recognized simply as artists. So I went to him because he was already working on this topic. I didn't want to impose him the topic. He was already working on freedom, wars, and also human rights and exile. He came to me, he read the insights, and he came to me with 2 pages of research questions. So I went to him with other research questions, and we met a whole afternoon drinking tea and deciding which kind of focus to give to this part of the research. And we found, this is the result, we found these 2 questions. So the first one is about what can do arts in order to fight against injustice connected to migration. So it's more structural, let's say, and quite broad, but there is a reason why it is broad. We can talk about this maybe in the discussion. And then how arts can create forms of homemaking against rupture and exclusion that is connected to migration. So how artists did practices of homemaking through their cultural practices. And these are the artists that started to work with us. The first one is Şener Yılmaz, is a photojournalist from Turkey. The second one is Tatiana Proshkoryakova, who is a dancer from Ukraine. The third one is Peshawar Mahmoud, a visual artist from Iraq. And the fourth one is Wadi Al-Khoury, who is a performer and rapper from Syria. We started to talk with them, and they were already also working on migration and exile and border crossing. Again, we didn't want to impose the topic. We simply wanted to have a dialogue with them about these 2 broad questions and how they could answer this through their cultural practice. So it was a sort of automatic, also in this case, automatically let's say the fieldwork was building himself, because they started to talk about their experience and their cultural practices, and it came out this video. Ali likes to call it an experimental video because it's not very beautiful, I have to say. So it's not like a film that we can present to festivals, but it's more a research experience that we did together. It's only 30 minutes, but we don't have the time to look at it now. But it's like if the storytelling was creating itself automatically, because they started to talk about their cultural practices, and they started to talk, from broader topics such as bigger system of injustice and resistance through arts, until the embodiment of migration through the artistic practice. So it's interesting because it was really automatic, this storytelling. I would like in these last minutes to present some analytical categories that I'm using to analyze this data. That we already made a co-analysis together with the artist, looking at the video and talking together about it. And now I'm trying to get back to some of the concepts that I used in my theoretical framework in order to see if there works or not, and what are the analytical categories that I can use. The first one, I already mentioned it before, is the aesthetic of subversion. Aesthetic of art as an aesthetic of subversion, presented by Federica Mazzara. So Federica Mazzara, as I said before, she studied a lot the Mediterranean, and she talks about the possibility of arts to create these acts of aesthetic of subversion in order to present and to create other imaginaries about migration. So she reflects a lot about the practices of visibilization, invisibilization, and also that brings to the humanization of people, crossing borders, and also about the modalities of presentation itself about migration. So just to make an example, this is a photogram about the video. here there is Wadi, who is doing a performance talking about his practices of let's say, of living in Marseille and how he's dealing, no? About living in Marseille, being an artist, being an exiled artist. And he says, I incorporated French, now I can understand how people speak at the bar, they do ta-ta-ti, ta-ta-ta, now he was also like, but I still dream in Arabic and I still talk to myself in Arabic. So he's speaking about some strategies, no? That is also showing through his bodies, because then what he's saying is also shown through his body, through his performance, to say, I'm not a stranger. I don't want to be felt as a stranger. The second analytical category is art as a political spiritual power. Here I refer to Gloria Anzaldúa. I really love her. She's a Chicana, she was a Chicana scholar speaking about fronterizi, border mechanism. And she talks about the importance of doing art as a as a therapy, individual and collective therapy. So she says it's exactly from the crisis that we can start to be artists and activists to change the situation of injustice. And it's really interesting, this book. I really suggest you to read this book, because it's quite a different perspective about arts and borders. And for example, this is the section about Peshawar, and it's talking. Peshawar crossed the Balkans with a group of other people, and he made land art in Iraq, but then he had to change, because you cannot do land art while you're crossing borders, and he started to draw these visage triste, sad faces, while crossing the borders on everything that he could find. And you can see that for him, he's doing a lot of this. Like he did 2,000, 3,000 of these faces. It's also a therapeutical, again, process, in the sense that it's not only a therapy for himself, but also, of course, they're symbolic, these faces. It cannot be all the people that he encountered during border crossing, but it represents also the condition of border crossing in a general sense. And the third one is about the margins as spaces of creative resistance. Here I refer to bell hooks. I don't explain it because I'm sure that all of you know her theories, but I would like to stress again the importance of language and artistic expression in order to be places of radical possibilities, places of struggle. No, again, we go back again to the right to speak, in the sense that who is creating narratives? And which kind of narratives are created, in matter of fact. Sorry, I'm going a little bit faster because I'm finishing my time. I just wanted to show you these photograms about the first artist that I showed you, Chener, and he's saying, this piece it was entitled Temporary Piece in My Temporary House. It's not only these pictures, and he's saying, of course, I'm aware that my situation, I'm not alone. There are a lot of people who are living this condition of exclusion and suffering and traumas, and through my arts, I really want to try to challenge this and to tell about this. I know that now my fight is not finished since I migrated, but I want to continue to fight through my arts. So here we can really see the issue of arts as a place of struggle that comes from also the margins. And for the margins, of course, I don't refer only to physical places, but also to the margins of our knowledge, in cultural terms. I go very quickly, and this is more a question, so I'm also trying to reflect upon the possibility for arts-based methods to be less extractivist when doing research. Of course, we know that it's impossible not to do that completely, because research is relations as well, and relations are full of power. I don't want to take back Foucault, but it's like this. So can we sustain forms of also the epistemic justice, while doing research through the arts? This is more a question, than an answer. But maybe we can talk about this later. And nothing. Thank you very much. Merci.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation and for having me. It is a multimedia presentation, so bear with us if things go slightly before I would do my best. So This talk explores how the voice's political power works beyond words to penetrate listeners' defenses and perhaps hopefully disrupt denial. By placing voice at the center of my work, I create ensemble performances and sound installations that immerse audiences in political realities they might have otherwise overlooked or suppressed. In these works, the voice functions not merely as communication, but as a physical experience that embodies and amplifies emotional and political undercurrents of our present and past. The sound clips that you will hear from this presentation are from a 6-channel immersive sound installation called A Maritime Haunting, and it uses the voice to convey the ambiguous loss resulting from border policies in the Mediterranean Sea. Through speech and song, the piece incorporates sonic elements of the sea, such as waves, tides, and surges, depicting the sea as a passageway, a grave, and in the context of migration, a space of exception. Wait, 1 second. The performers vocally explored the experience of ambiguous loss related to the lives lost during migration. Assuming the role of an ancient Greek chorus to create a collective voice of mourning, they express an elegy for those lost and presumed dead at sea. The voices will merge and divide, experimenting with pitch, intonation, breath, pacing, and silence, transitioning from operatic singing to theatrical utterances to narrate the realities of this contemporary tragedy. Around the world, women traditionally have served as public mourners. In ancient Greece, women performed lamentations following the body in funeral processions. In Ireland, there are keeners designated to initiate audible lamentations. The lead keener is the first to cry and recite poetry. Following her, a group of women will join in publicly mourning. In ancient and contemporary Kurdish culture, there is tradition of dembej, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing. Essentially, storytellers, these groups of women perform at social events, often funerals. Within dembej, there is a subgenre called kilam, which is a style within which the women move spontaneously, letting the emotion flow through them. In this moment, they, like the keeners, become mediums, conveying messages between the living and the dead, allowing the emotion of the event to pass between the ones who have died and those left behind. None of these public performances are centered on the expression of voice as an individual. Rather, they are focused on performing what Marlene Schaefers has termed a social labor, pointing towards a collective experience. Following the tradition of the female voice as a medium for mourning, I work with female-identifying actors and singers. Our process is both collaborative and improvisational. Starting with the research I do and then I write a script, we go through a series of readings. During this time, we are testing. We're testing the language, we're testing the delivery. We explore how pitch, tone, pacing, and silence can convey different moods or states of being, adding depth, adding tension. We layer voices, and we play with unison. The voices merge and divide, they build, they fade away, and they range for a variety of utterances. They leave space for silence. They become the collective character, not an individual voice, but rather a combined articulation of a contemporary tragedy. They perform a social labor. In his book, The Poetics of listening, Brandon Lavelle argues for shifting the emphasis from voice as a question of representation as what works at social and political recognition, and toward an engagement with its audibility, internality, and the emotion, and the effective impact voices can have. We are utilizing the effective capacities of the voice, often beyond recognizable language, to gain the attention of our audience. In reference to her translation of Sophocles' Electra, Anne Carson wrote, "Indeed, it is not easy to decide what gives the screaming of Electra its power. Sophocles has invented for her a language of lament that is like listening to an X-ray. Electra's cries are just bones of sound." In her translation, Anne Carson made a distinct decision to leave all of Electra's lamentations in ancient Greek capitalized. Oi, moi, talaina. She imagined Electra screaming, uttering cries that are at the edge of language. So when writing these pieces, I write the lyrics of the singers using Anne Carson's non-translations. Their lamentations exist in a non-verbal yet bodily space. They point to language without making meaning. They reference something internal, something non-nameable, something that is akin to mourning. Singing further abstracts this meaning-making. While it brings the voice to the forefront, it lets the voice be the bearer of all that cannot be expressed through language, of all that is bodily. For each of the choral parts, I follow Anne Carson's approach in her translation of Electra. I give the singers and the composer emotive direction and context of what is occurring at each point in the script, and then assign one or more of Anne Carson's non-translations to the section. The ensemble typically consists of a contralto, 2 mezzo-sopranos, and a soprano, along with the actors. The contralto is the rarest of classified voice types for female singers, and they typically sing supporting melodies for sopranos. Their tone is deep, it's considered dark, it is powerful, the vibrations of which can be transferred. It is a relational event. Bruno de Souza wrote that it's naive and unproductive to assume that you can automatically get people to sit down and spend time ingesting and reflecting on complex stories that are completely removed from their own experience, especially in an attention economy in which we're increasingly socialized into a fast-forward relationship with endless streams of information. So, given that, how can we create a situation in which people will slow down, see, listen, reflect, and potentially be moved to take action? In her book, Imperfect Solidarities, from 2024, Bruno de Souza writes about Candice Brights's installation Love Story. Some of you may be familiar with the Venice Biennale a few years ago. It's a multi-channel installation by the South African artist Candice Brights, in which the artist plays with ideas of empathy, authenticity, and spectacle in the retelling of refugees' migration stories by placing Hollywood actors Alec Baldwin and Julianne Moore in a simple studio setup with green screen backdrop. They sit in a director's chair and they speak directly to the camera. They are familiar, they're charismatic, and they're moving. They are recounting in first person horrifying and tragic stories of survival. Over the course of the work, it becomes clear that they are surely not the stories of the actors, nor a fictional character that the actors are portraying. But what becomes abundantly clear is that these are not singular stories. Moore and Baldwin have been charged with conveying testimonies of 6 refugees from across the world. Each was forced to flee their homes, each escaping war, persecution, and barbarity. De Souza asks, what does it take for us as viewers to pay attention to the lives of millions? And at the time that she was writing this, it was 68.5 million according to the UN, more than 25 million of whom are classified as refugees, who have been driven from their homes due to political, economic, and environmental pressures. Does hearing of the crisis via these undeniably talented actors, or in condensed form and cleverly edited, allow us to heed it in ways that we otherwise would not? Outside of the hyper-produced context, we have, or outside of this hyper-produced context, we have the grasp of the global migration crises through news sources and media. We are familiar with depictions of migrants in precarious situations. There have been many like this one. A fishing trawler in the middle of the Mediterranean, tilted on its side, the deck overcrowded with migrants, many not wearing life jackets. While the deep blue sea is calm, countless have already fallen into the water and are thrashing around. Do they know how to swim? In this seemingly distant reality, is anyone besides from a photographer nearby to rescue them? But as Nicholas Mirza points out in an interview with Harman Hamaya in 2023, we are experiencing a banality of images. The oversaturation of images is no accident. With this many images in circulation seen on screens through social media, it becomes very difficult for any single image to stand out, to make an impact. Even if we do hold on to it, gaze for more than a few seconds, it is soon forgotten or surpassed by the multitudes that follow. Is this a tactic in place so that those of us so inclined can feel politically aware of a global crisis, just enough to feel like we have engaged? As we doom scroll through streams of various tragedies, some hyperlocal, many distant, what will make us stop and allow ourselves a response? Judith Butler argues in Frames of War that grievability is a presupposition of a life that matters. However, who defines a life that matters? How do we ensure that all lives are grievable? Who are the architects of these hierarchies which builds into beings or non-beings, the grievable and the non-grievable? While there are writers of policy, while there are writers of policy, politicians and tyrants, and perhaps 1% that are invested in such hierarchies, there's also the rest of us who are wrestling, or not as the case may be, with realities of denial. When the knowledge of such tragedies is mediated through a screen, we become metaphorical bystanders, and the immediacy vanishes. We are not pulled to identify with the victims, to imagine ourselves in such a situation. Though, no doubt, we recognize the tragedy, we are stifled in our ability to feel implicated.
We gaze at distant others.
We turn a blind eye. We wear blinkers. We block out, shut off, repress. Unable to live in a state of continual awareness, we don't expose ourselves to unpalatable information. We make the decision to switch off those sources. We are apathetic, passive, indifferent, unresponsive.
Denial is an unconscious mechanism of defense.
It is a method of coping with guilt and anxiety.
We are vaguely aware of our choice to not look, but not conscious of exactly what we are avoiding. Bypassing, escaping, sidestepping.
By immersing an audience in a chorus of voices, voices that are testing the limits of language, voices that are in moments soft, comforting, voices that pierce, voices that vibrate, and creating an experience of vicarious witnessing to contemporary tragedies through the relational event of the voice, through the embodied experience of listening.
Most sunken vessels are never recovered. Most bodies descend to the bottom of the sea as water fills their lungs. Their body gravity increases, some emerging later after entering the stage of decomposition.
The bodies disarticulate at the joints, distal to proximal, wrist to elbow to shoulder, feet, ankle, knee.
The mandible around the same time as the hands, the cranium parallel to the forearms.
The body's in flotation devices may not sink, but drift further and further with the currents and winds.
Hurricane. The air is filled with foam and spray. The sea is completely white with driving spray. Visibility is seriously affected.
Through policies of deterrence and neglect,
Carelessness, disrespect, indifference, oversight, disdain. The Mediterranean is a cemetery.
liked the way your presentation resonated with one of Bidisha. Bidisha was mentioning the raising this issue of the right to be heard, but at the same time we say, yeah, they had the right to be heard, but we are all enmeshed in this constant flow of information. So, but still, I mean, sometimes one picture, one image can make a difference. We've seen it with the picture of the island currently on the beach, which somehow at some points suspending these flows and created a window where they caught our attention. And maybe Mariana, you're more familiar than me with this picture, and maybe you have something to say about it. Yeah, but I don't want to speak too much. And also welcome to the students that arrived to the last presentation. We have some time for the questions, so feel free to. Yeah, Alan.
Well, thank you for the session. I thought it was very excellent. I have a question for Melissa and a question for Freya. Melissa, I was very struck by the way in which you're using Marseille as a place which is embodied, you're embodied in it as you walk through it. And I run slave site tours in my home city and tours in other places where traumatic incidents have happened. I was just wondering whether that methodology, that ethnography, creates certain kinds of possibilities and difficulties. And I just wanted you to maybe talk about that. And for Freya, I love the way in which you're using sorry, it's a very hard thing to talk about, isn't it? I was just wondering if you've looked at the jazz musicians of the 1960s, and especially Max Roach in his Freedom Now suite, because he asked the jazz singer Abbey Lincoln to just to not sing but to scream. And the sound is just absolutely incredible. It's very like this way of trying to move away from telling to showing. And I was just wondering whether that might be a mode to kind of think through the kinds of things you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. It's very difficult in the sense that, yes, it created positive aspects and negative aspects, but let's say that at a certain moment it was difficult to trace the boundaries of my research, because after the research I started to live in Marseille as well. So I lived in Bologna. I'm living in both cities, Bologna and Marseille, because I fell in love with the city, I have to say. So, and it's like, if the field work now continues, that's why it's a work in progress. I think that it's not finished yet. And through the connection with artists, I started to meet other artists, and sometimes they come to look for me because they want to tell their stories. So it's never ending. And of course, there is a big issue that is positioning. So I'm taking notes about how I feel about this, and also what is my role. Am I an insider, an outsider, no, for example, and reflecting a lot about the ethics of the research and my positioning in the research, within the research. About the difficulties, let's say another question is about what I can give back in order to overcome the extractivist approach in the research. Since I'm on the fieldwork since a long time, and I don't want to, let's say, exploit the artist to have some research results and so on. So this is another issue that I'm trying to reflect on. My answer is that I talk with people simply and ask, what can I do for you? I'm against giving directly money, unless it is an artistic project. In this case, it was so. But about the participation, which is the right thing to do, and how can you give back? final question is that I really had difficulties in writing about this, honestly, because after a while, some people became my friends as well. So it's really difficult, no? And you really can stress about how does or if research objectifies people and how you deal with it, and how we can overcome this objectification, how you can really represent their voices. So thank you for your question. It's still a work in progress, the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I'm not familiar with this, what you're talking about specifically, but and there's parts of the work that I didn't bring because maybe they're a little intense to hear, and not quite this situation's not perfect for it, but you know, we're attempting to use the voice not just in its sort of like pleasing, soothing, sort of like perhaps like sonically aesthetic capacities, but there are moments which are maybe like uglier or uncomfortable, or, you know, as I said before, piercing, that can make an audience jump to things like this, trying to really sort of get into the body of the audience.
Thank you so much. This is really more than touching. It's really disturbing. It's more comments. I mean, I think I follow on Alan's remark about the 70s. You know, the plates, for instance, made me think of Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, where, you know, she was well accused, I mean, for Sojourner Truth's plate. I mean, she had nothing in Sojourner Truth's plate in the dinner party. So I don't know if it, you know, let's say what I saw made me think about certain genealogy of how artists are going to engage with, you know, with politics and with, you know, intervention. You know, so yeah, I go back to the 70s. The other remark was about Melissa and, you know, and Toni Morrison. You know, Toni Morrison came to Paris and was given what is called, you know, ironically, carte blanche at the Louvre. And she, you know, the title of her, you know, the volume that came out is called The Foreigner's Home. And she even commented about the raft of the Medusa. So it's really a questioning about, you know, who's the foreigner. And the foreigner's home, she says, is both the home of the foreigner and is the foreigner home. You know, can the foreigner be home? So, you know, I don't know what to say about even my own intervention. It's more that I think that what I saw in you is a very contemporary take on what goes on, you know, is going on. At the same time, because my own field, I feel that there is a genealogy of the ways in which certain political interventions, you know, happened. 70s, you know, Morrison, I can't remember when it was. It's not so long ago, and she was really addressing also the, you know, the migrant crisis. And for La Frontera, I mean, that is also the 70s, you know, and it's Mexican border, and the place of these feminists, you know, Latinas, at the time of the feminist movement. So, you know, take my comment more as some sort of context and, you know, historical or diachronic genealogy, which is not taking away what you're saying, quite the opposite. You know, the question could be like, what is different now? What is going on now? That, you know, certain interventions take the shape that they shake, that they take, sorry, that they shake also. Maybe shaking things too.
Elsa, please, can you give it to Elsa?
Somebody else wanted to.
Yes, thank you so much all for this panel. I had two questions for Mariana and maybe one for you, Melissa. You talked about this conversation you had with the photojournalist and about this gap between the situation in interviews and the photograph. I would like to know more about this conversation. And then you talked about, it's towards the end, you said, when I look at the photos, a new story emerges. And this I'm curious about also. And for Melissa, about the film that you did with Ali, you maybe it was not a notion that you've been thinking so much for, but you said it's a research experience, and yes, I'm wondering if you could tell us more about this notion of. I don't know if it's something you've been theorizing a lot, but I like the idea of the research experience. The film as a research experience.
There's a question behind you, Ali.
Shall she answer that?
No, we take the third question and then.
Thank you. Thank you for wonderful presentations from all of you. I have a question about the cemeteries. Mariana, you spoke about this, how the cemetery in a way is presenting class distinctions in how or where people are buried, and I wanted to ask you if you could develop that a little bit more, and if it also has to do with where people come from, what is the role of forensics in determining that, and is there forensic work being done in relation to the cemeteries or not? And I also noticed some of the markings on the graves. The first ones that you showed were more sort of permanent kind of markers, or more sort of developed, I guess, in a way. And the last ones you showed are more like just these pieces of wood with a, sort of a marker, like a very, they seem more like impermanent. So I wanted to ask you about those different practices, and if those practices have changed over time as a result of maybe more people being buried, or what are the conditions under which this has changed, and are there activists or families involved in work in relation to the cemetery, or is it just kind of abandoned? And is this cemetery unique, or are there others? And for the case of Lampedusa, similarly, I was wondering if there are other places of burial in the island, and are there activists working? Like, what's the difference in how this cemetery that was sort of a space for activism and artistic representation? What are the conditions under which that occurred, and has that impacted other sites of burial? Has it allowed for families to have a connection and perhaps identification or return of the remains? So a little bit like thinking across all of these, like the impacts of these sites and the fight for justice for families and for those who are buried there. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, please, Marina.
So I started by talking on the first two questions, visitors versus photos. It took me a very long time to call myself a photographer. I still don't feel very comfortable on that, even though I was selling my photos at some point. So primarily I was focusing on interviewing and quotes I had in PowerPoint that from interviews I did before I started my PhD. When I look at the photos and explanations of the interviews, I can see patterns that I couldn't see when I was taking the interviews. So I don't really know how to explain it, but now I try to use them together. And I'm trying to build a story for my thesis. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't actually know if I have answered the question, probably not. And I usually take the photos. I usually take the photos, I keep them in my archive, and then I look at them maybe 6 months later. I have the benefit of being a part-time student. So I look at them when I take them, and then I relook at them over and over, and I can see different stories, and I can remember different moments, and I can I can make the connections, inspiration to the actual interview. So for example, I have a photo of a man shouting, and he was moving like that. I use that photo quite a lot. He was praying in that specific photo, and he was saying that it was right after Moria burned down. It was an impromptu prayer on the streets, literally outside Lidl in Lesbos, in Mytilene. And he was saying that we haven't come here to steal your money or your food. We don't want to stay here. We want to be safe from COVID and safe in general. And I think of that interview quite a lot. I also have it wasn't actually in the interview, I have the prayer in a video and I translated it. And every time I look at it, something different emerges from the photo. So I see my research more of a story rather than anything else. And being part-time helped me quite a lot find that story and creating that story. And I think I'm at this point that I can finally write it. It's not the work of my life. I just want to make my PhD at this point. But I want my PhD to tell a story, the story of migration. I don't care if it makes a theoretical contribution or anything like that. My intention was not to actually stay in academia when I started. I just wanted to understand the border a little bit better. I think I reached the point that I understand it, and I'm happy with that. And on the cemetery, did I answer your questions? I'm not sure. So I'll have to talk about it later. On the cemetery, it's a weird story. So Greece is not very high in the formal cemetery. The majority of people in Greece are Christian Orthodox. It's the religion that is written in the Greek Constitution. We don't have a formal religion per se, but it's written in the Constitution that the majority of people are Greek Orthodox. There is a lot of resistance in Lesbos specifically in accepting a refugee cemetery, accepting a Muslim cemetery. So this one is built inside private land. It's not public land. The land belongs to former deputy mayor. The person, from what I've known, and there are a lot of stories around the cemetery, but the one I have is that there was a shipwreck at some point. There was no space in the Orthodox cemetery to bury people. Bear in mind, people were being buried in that cemetery, in the Orthodox cemetery in Mytilene, but outside. And this is because of how the Orthodox religion is organized. So if you're not Greek Orthodox, you're not allowed to stay inside the premises of the cemetery, but you are buried outside the cemetery, sometimes behind the cemetery. And this is the case everywhere, not just in Greece, and everywhere. This one started, there was no space in the official cemetery. There were a lot of people dying. And, someone who was on the island, who was Muslim, and he's Egyptian, tried to find a space to bury the people, and he became an informal imam. At some point, the mayor wanted, at some point he was named as an official imam of the island, and there was a lot of resistance, and that was not accepted. So the cemetery is a bit odd as a state. There are no formal structures. There is no formal way of cataloging the dead. If you see different graves, they are different information is written there. These specific graves, they were paid by the families of the people. That's why they have a very specific architecture. And I don't know if this is the case for Shia Muslims, but this is how the Greek Orthodox graves look like. For the last one, where I have the ones with the wooden poles, these were from a shipwreck that took place in October 2022. There was no money to create the actual stones, so the person who acted as the imam put those wooden poles, and the friends of the people wrote the names and ages, and that's it. Right now, this is not the case. Right now, the cemetery has been completely restructured and reconstructed by a German NGO that took the initiative to change it. But my research kind of stops in 2022. And the class distinctions, I thought about this when I went to after I looked at the photos, because the people with the wooden poles are from Somalia. The ones, the children's names and ages that I have are from Syria. I think activists and locals paid for those gravestones, and the ones here, the families pay for them. So I can see a form of a class distinction and maybe ethnic distinction as well. I'm still trying to figure out that specific cemetery. It took me a long time to actually go back to it and deal with what I saw there. And I've been going to cemeteries since I was a child. It's something that I find them interesting. But this specific one changed my research to a degree that I don't expect it to change.
I have one more question. There's someone else?
Okay. We'll take a second, last round of question after, but Kenya, you wanted to say something?
Thank you so much for that important question. So let's go back to 2022, Lampedusa. When I was there, basically there were no more space for bodies at that time. So if someone came in and had lost his or her life, they would be transferred further on into other grave sites in Italy. The same with the ones who came in and survived. Actually, when I was there in 2022, they were evacuating surviving refugees from Lampedusa to other places in Italy because the hotspot, were really over its capacity to be able to accommodate so many people. And we just had a visit from Carina Horsti last week, actually presenting her book from Lampedusa, and she was explaining how when she revisited the island during many years, then every time she came, she could see signs of different actors coming to the island in the graveyards, in the way that they were decorated. So I thought that was quite interesting as well. Referring back to the presentation of course representation is about the people who died, but it's also very much about the people who are trying to make a difference. Then in regards to whether it's giving something back in regards to identification, I would definitely say in the case of Wilila, it did. Because the brother came and he was actually able to get verification. This is my sister, she's buried here. And then the From did a ceremony to be able to give that information further on to the family. So that way it did play a role. But I would say in general, it's quite difficult to get the bodies back home. It's costly, it requires a lot of bureaucracy. That doesn't happen most of the time. Class distinctions, yes, definitely. So just visiting these two different graveyards in Lampedusa showed, well, the first one was a smaller one, the Graves of the Unknown, and there had been put a lot of effort and work into decorating and really, providing love to this one and making it visible. And then we went to the other one, where the firm had also done a lot of really great work, but it was also quite striking to me how the poor Italians also didn't get a lot of attention in these graveyards. So like you're talking about class distinction, there's definitely very visible signs of class distinctions in the graveyards that I think would be interesting to even explore more. And then if it's okay, I feel like ending with a very recent interview I did with a Somali-Italian journalist, Shukri Said, who actually on her own identified 23 Somalis who lost their lives on a very recent shipwreck in August. And the way that she did that was to make an announcement in BBC Somali, where she said, if anyone are missing their loved ones around this time, please send me school documents with pictures, university documents, whatever you have. And then she really started to see whether that fitted the bodies that she had. So she was stopping the Italian authorities to just bury them without any form of identification. And she actually succeeded in identifying everyone except for 2. So she also did an online ceremony with the family members, so they would be able to visibly see, is this my loved one laying here? It's of course not like you presented with the scientific identification with DNA, but it's enough to give the families, the knowledge of, okay, this is my loved one, and at least to be able to do some kind of ceremony.
Judith.
No. Sorry, I would like to finish this round of answers first.
I will be very brief. So about the concept of activism and the connection between arts and politics, you are completely right, and I'm trying to do a study about what are the roots of activism actually, because the risk is to fall into Eurocentrism, no? Because they say it's the Greek theater, and okay, it's Bertolt Brecht, you don't know, but then I found, for example, the Amauta Review in Peru in the 20s, that is about revolutionary indigenism through arts. I think, of course, about Chicana activism, now since the 60s and the 70s in North America. I think about the Black Artist Movement as well. So the origins are very different, and it's really important to go out, no, as you said, from this Eurocentric vision of activism. And it is true that now we hear about so it's important to remind us that there are different perspectives on this, and so thank you for your comment. And about the research experience, actually it's important because, as I said, the video is not an artistic project, so our aim was not to do arts, but to use the arts as a place of reflection in order to also recognize the situated knowledge, not taking up from Adorna Haraway, of people that experience migration themselves, not only as object of their research. And it's not easy, of course, also to work between sociology and artistic production is not easy. Sometimes I liked some pieces of the interview, and Ali liked other ones, and so we started to talk about this. But again, I go back to the concept of epistemic partners. So in this case, they share their knowledge through their cultural practices.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you didn't want to say anything? Okay. So maybe we can give 1 minute question and 1 minute answer.
No, it's just a quick mention. I mean, going back to ethnography and embodied research and all the claims and the difficulties that we have been mentioning. I mean, this has been an ongoing concern within the network. And I just, want to mention the names of Alessandro Corso, also, who was very present at the beginning, in fact, of the network. And also, there is a wonderful article coming up in the cultural studies, special issue that is forthcoming in 2026, and a wonderful article by Paolo Vulcani. So again, it's Italy, and so we look forward to that because it's really all about that as well.
And since we have 30 seconds, I just want to make a remark, and to Melissa, when we speak about ethnographic research and the positionality of the researcher when they look at the people as their subject and the debate about it. And as someone who does ethnography, I'm struggling to finish this article about the death of Gaza and how can you make Gazans as your subject. So I decided to focus on the agency of the Gazans in facing death and make their voices heard, which makes it good for them as an awareness and as a researcher, not to talk at them or about them, but make their voices heard. Thank you so much. Well on time. You have coffee break.